Welcome to Confessions of an Entrepreneur, powered by RG. My name is Carl Swansbury, and I'm truly thrilled today to welcome Andrew Hulbert onto my podcast. Andrew is a true entrepreneur. He has started up, scaled up, sold many businesses. And of course, he has done so as a consequence of hard yards, focus, single-mindedness, and perhaps an absolute obsession to make sure that each of the businesses he has founded become best in class. Andrew now, as a very wealthy, financially independent entrepreneur, chooses to spend more time outside of business than in. And I'm really looking forward to today, not only understanding the playbook that he has used many times over to scale businesses of value, but also actually his now why. I really believe you, our viewers, are in for a real treat today, and I'm delighted that you've been able to join us. Andrew, first of all, can I just thank you so much for agreeing to appear today on my Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast.
I love the title Confessions. I'm looking forward to what I'm going to confess today. So let's see it.
Indeed.
But no, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Total pleasure. So the first thing I'd love to ask, almost starting with the end in mind, is you, of course, are a very successful entrepreneur. You built and sold businesses, and you now have financial independence, probably way beyond what you ever thought was possible, Andrew, as a young man in business. What's your now purpose?
My purpose is being a father. And you know what? Being a father, being a good husband, and being a good son. I think those are my three key things. I was all in for 9 years when I was running that business, and I neglected my family, my wife, my kids. They weren't my priority. And when I made the money and I managed to retire a couple of years ago, I promised them that I would be a good dad. And actually, I now love it. And that's what I want to be. I see my success now in the value that my children can bring to the world and like the great habits that they can have and what they can do to change the world. And with my kids, they're going to be very lucky, right? I didn't grow up with money. They are going to grow up with money.
Right.
But now that's a responsibility to make sure that they don't grow up like they're on Made in Chelsea.
Yes, let's avoid that if possible.
Yes. But actually, yes, so really it's about being a great father and being a great part of my family community, which is what my background is and where I'm from.
Yeah, I love that. And just to ask, because a lot of people, and you've almost implied it there, a lot of people think that you can't be a phenomenal business person at the same time as being a phenomenal father, a phenomenal best friend, a phenomenal son, a phenomenal husband. Do you agree with that? Because it makes it sound like it's one or the other.
Yeah, that is a really deep question. We could talk all day just about that. If you can find me someone, especially a father, who can strike a balance where they're genuinely there for their kids and they can genuinely like make a real difference in their business. I haven't met someone that can do it all at this stage. Now, many people can be great fathers and run a business at the same time, but their friends maybe don't get as much attention or their wider family and things. So I think it is possible, but also it depends what stage of the business cycle are you at? Because I'm a real believer in those first 3, 4, 5 years. I think if you're going to do it, you need to do it. And I believe in all-in culture and actually making it happen. So I think there are 2 times in your life to start a business. One is in your 20s when you probably don't have kids yet. Maybe got a mortgage, maybe you don't. And the second time is in your 50s when if you have had kids, they've grown up and they've gone and you're back to being able to go all in again. I meet many, many entrepreneurs now who've started a business. They have 2, 3, 4 kids. And the challenge is, how do they balance everything out? And it is hard because you have conflicting things. But for me, Pareto, my business, it was my baby. And actually, I put a lot more time into that business than I did my own kids when they were born. But that's why when I retired and I stepped back, I wanted to make sure they were back at the priority again. So it is possible, but I haven't met many people that have done it. And I certainly wasn't one of the people that did it well.
And just before we perhaps go right back to the beginning, Andrew, I'd love to just spend a bit more time really understanding why you and your wife years ago committed to this idea of having financial independence by 40 and having retired by 40, because for many, that's a very premature age to choose to hang up your business boots.
Yes.
And perhaps might have been an age that at that time might have been perhaps not an age whereby you could achieve such financial independence. So why was it you were so clear on that so early?
Well, if I'm totally honest, my wife wasn't really on board with this concept. So if we start the confessions off early,
let's do it.
When I was 27, so just very briefly, I'd worked for 6 years in a corporate business. It was a small one, but it had got bought out and we became a much bigger organization. And I had a good job. I was on maybe 100K by the age of 26, that sort of early stage thing. But it wasn't fulfilling me. And I saw these big companies weren't really delivering very well to the customers. So I genuinely went home to my wife one day and said, I'm going to do this and I think I can do it better, but I'm going to take all the risk. And I had the conversation where I'm like, look, what I'm putting on the line is my marriage, my house, because we had a house and a mortgage at that stage, but we didn't have any kids. And I was like, that's the risk I'm willing to take. Now, my wife wasn't necessarily on board with that risk at the very beginning because she said, look, we just worked hard. We got married. We got our house. Right. You're on 100K. We got a good salary. She was working as well. We had a really nice life. But it wasn't enough for me. I wanted to go a little bit harder. The idea of retiring by 40, I don't think it was really specific that it had to be 40. But what I knew was I consider work to be a corporate curve in life. So you go to school, maybe you get an apprenticeship or you go to university, you work for 40 years, you get your pension, you go home and you die. Really, that's how I see corporate life. And I don't see that as very fulfilling. So for me, a sort of this curve, I wanted to get off the curve as early as possible. Now, I'm a brilliant entrepreneur, but I'm also an upstart and I don't like it when people tell me what to do. And so like corporate life wasn't really for me because I didn't really follow the rules and I got into trouble all the time for that. So what I actually wanted to do was just wake up and make my own decisions on a day-to-day basis. Money enables you to do that. But actually, there wasn't necessarily a time frame I was putting on it to start with. After 7 years, when I've been running the business and I was all in and we had 2 kids, that's when my wife was saying, look, you need to be here as a father. And I was saying, just give me 3 years and I will grow it and I will sell it. And we did it in 2.5 years in the end. And that was very romantic. It's a nice story. But yeah, it was just hard work. And I finished when I was 37 in the end, which obviously was very lucky for me. But yeah, it was more just about waking up and making my own decisions. Money enables you to do that, but then you actually need to make those decisions for yourself.
Totally. Thanks, Andrew. We'll probably come back to some of these points a little later. Please, there's a lot of detail we could go into. But just to go right back to the beginning. So obviously you said you started your professional life working within a corporate environment as an employee, earning a 6-figure salary, which is fantastic. At that time when you were climbing the corporate ladder, did you know that you were meant for something else? Did you know that you were going to have to set up a business? Was there an itch to scratch?
Yes, but way earlier than that. I think probably the age of 10, maybe 12, 14. I knew right from the very beginning that I had to do things my own way. And as a kid, that got me into lots of trouble because I never listened to anybody. And, you know, I was very adventurous early on. So because we're from Oxford, we used to cycle everywhere. Yes. So from the age of 8, you get on a bike and you go off and then you get into all sorts of trouble. I could buy cigarettes at 11. I could buy alcohol at 13. I was buying condoms at 14. I remember, right? I mean, it was all happening very early. And actually, if you ever want to get over an embarrassment, be a 14-year-old boy going into a shop and asking for condoms for the first time. That's a great place to start. But no, so I knew early on I was really organized. I was really driven. And if I wanted to do something, I would do it. I remember I wanted to buy a moped, and a moped was about £1,000. And I started saving when I was 13 and a half. And by the age of 15, I had the £1,000 and I bought this moped. But I was really focused on doing it. And I had that moped for about 15 years in the end. I couldn't let it go because it represented so much for me. I used to go and start it up in the garden occasionally. So I knew from the beginning that I had a skill that I could do stuff with. When I got into corporate world, so I went to university in the end, and then I went into a small business called Rollright, which was a property services business, and they did about 4 years. Now, what worked for me there was I worked really hard. And what that meant was I was always available. I was answering the phone out of hours. I would take on lots of responsibility for new projects. If a new contract was won, I'd say, hey, let me mobilize this. I never asked for any more money. I never asked for a better title. I just sort of said, right, I've got all these skills that I actually want to hone in. And for anybody who's thinking of starting a business in 5-10 years time, go and work for an SME for a while. Go and see what it's like, see the mistakes that they make and how finance work and sales works and contracts and payroll and all those things. We then got bought out. So I did that for 4 years. We got bought out by a big German business. And we went from being a £10 million business to an £8 billion business overnight. And that's where where I really started to feel the pressure then, because For 2 years, I was battling the process in terms of we had these brilliant small clients that wanted to be delivered to in a certain way. We now had enormous construction-based processes that meant we couldn't do what we needed to do for the customers. And that's when I was getting a bit naughty and I was doing things like making up fake purchase orders to buy things so that I could deliver services to the customer, or doing all sorts of things that was always about making it work for the customer, but not for the organization. And yeah, so after 2 years of that, that was enough for me. And I sort of butted heads enough and I decided I would go and set up a business. And that's how it all began.
Interesting. And if that business that you were employed by wasn't sold to that corporate, how might things have played out differently, do you think?
I was having this conversation only last week because the two guys, Charlie and Clive, that took me on, who were owners of that business early on, we're still friends now.
Awesome.
One of them bought a ski chalet, so I've been skiing once. Not a very good skier. If Bill Finger hadn't have bought Rollright, I'm convinced I'd still be at Rollright now because I was working my way to the top. I would have been on the board. I probably would have been CEO. Whether I'd have had my own shares or not, I don't know. But actually, I hadn't run my own business at that stage, but I'd worked in an SME that made me feel like I was part of that business.
Sure.
And actually, had I have got to CEO, I would have been on a great salary and, been looked after. But I don't know what actually would have happened from that point. So, when we say bad things happen for a reason sometimes, well, actually, for me, when the buyout happened, it was a really disappointing thing. For those 2 weeks, 2 years, it was really hard to be in that environment. But you realize that was all the skill set that you needed. And one of the biggest learnings I give now is when bad things happen, just learn from those bad things that are happening to other people and around you at the same time. A lot of my management style came from people I didn't respect in terms of, I see how you're doing it badly. I'm not going to do it the same way as is. I didn't really have any amazing people where I'm like, wow, I need to be like you. It was more, I don't want to be like you. And I'm going to build something different. So yeah, that was really how it all happened. But if Rollright wouldn't have sold, probably I would have still been there. But I would have been CEO eventually, and maybe would have got shares eventually. But maybe we would have grown the business much bigger than 10 million. I'm not sure.
Just to ask, so when you were climbing the corporate ladder, not only when the business was a SME, but when you became part of Bill Finger, how did you go about making sure that your view, whilst yes, was clearly something you believed in, otherwise you wouldn't have been championing that position, was right? And by right, I mean, it's easy, isn't it, to have a difference of opinion with someone, but how do you know that your opinion is right and what's in the best interest of the business? So how did you know that what you thought was right was actually right versus you just wanting to do things your way?
That's a really deep question. I don't know if what I wanted to do was right, I guess. And I still don't know today if what I wanted to do was right. I'm a man of the people and for the people. So being working class background properly, my dad was in a factory 40 years. My mum was in Sainsbury's 30 years, as well as being a cleaner and making sandwiches and doing a paper round and raising 3 kids at the same time. So I think for me, I would put myself in the middle of the team, but not like the senior team, the operational team. So what really worked for me in terms of maybe working out whether what I was saying was right was I would use food. So let's just say we had a big team on a site. So in my world, you'd have a load of engineers sat at, say, London Zoo, for example, and I would take them food and I'd sit in the workshop with them and have a chat. That is a great way to bounce ideas off people, to understand whether what you're saying is right. And I can go onto a site, the senior management team can tell me whatever they like, and they're going to sugarcoat what they tell me because their own ass is on the line if they're not getting it right. Go and speak to Johnny in the workshop and say, hey, mate, what's actually going on here? Or tell me about that party you guys had last week, or tell me about this, tell me about that. You can build a level of trust. When I was younger, every Sunday afternoon, all of my family would go to my nan's house. We'd all eat together, we'd all share stories, and we'd all help each other. And that sense of community, I'm talking 30 people in a living room that has 4 seats, by the way. And we'd be upstairs on the bed watching The Simpsons as kids. That never left me, that spirit of community. So I don't know if I was right. I still don't know if I'm right a lot of the time. I speak with real convictions. So sometimes people think I'm right, and so do I sometimes. But actually, it was almost about let's listen to what the people think, and let's see how we can build it together. We have all been in those real senior corporate meetings where everybody has just swallowed a business thesaurus and is talking total bullshit in the meeting. And actually, that wasn't me. That was never me. I was like, let's cut through it. What do we actually need to do here? And I had enough conviction and enough intelligence. I'd look at problems that other big businesses were having or big service providers delivering to customers and say, you don't want to do it that way. I think we can do it this way. Let's build something together and go from there. So, but yeah, I don't think I was always right.
No.
I just said it with conviction.
And that conviction or that confidence or that self-belief, I guess all one and the same thing. How did you go about developing that collection of skills so early in your career, which of course has stood you in great stead as you built and sold businesses?
Thank you. It started from those early days when I was a young boy. And actually, the biggest thing I thank my parents for is a sense of adventure and being out and being allowed to go out. Imagine an 8-year-old these days with a bicycle. My mum would just say to me, come back before it's dark, or when it's dark, come back. And actually, we didn't have phones, we didn't have tags, we didn't have bands, we didn't have anything.
Trusting you just to do that.
Yeah, and trust is a very big thing to give a young person. But throughout my whole life, we always had this sense of adventure and a sense of doing things ourselves. And that came from early on. Even when I was, say, 16, 17, and I'd gone to sixth form, and this is before WhatsApp and things. So if you wanted to organize a big party, then actually you had to do it through word of mouth. You literally go around the playground, or you go and network with the girls from the private school over the road and say, hey, are you having a party this weekend? And then we'd cycle for like 2 hours in the middle of the night to go to these parties, bring a load of alcohol, which made us popular while we were there, get drunk. I'd always steal a pizza out the freezer to eat the next day for breakfast, and then cycle on my mum's bike because mine had probably been stolen. And that was just it, right? So you had that conviction really early doors. But when you take that then into business, it delivers a level of like camaraderie and it delivers a level of leadership in a way that people hadn't seen before. And what I always used to find was I could integrate with people on a relatively normal level. There are many, many, many leaders in my sector and many others that they walk into a room and people are a bit scared of them. That wasn't me. I'd walk into a room and go, hey, John, how's your wife going? Or, how did your kid get on at football last week? Or what about this and what about that? And I made a real effort to get to know people. And that inner confidence and that community and the food and being together, it came from my upbringing, which then just continued throughout my whole life. But I wasn't a leader that pretended to have the answers. I was a leader that said, hey, let's work this out together. And also, I genuinely don't believe that I am any better than anybody else, nor is anyone better than me. We just have different skills and we just have different ways of approaching things. So you probably have my mum to thank for where the inner belief system came from. She probably regrets that sometimes when I was a very headstrong young man. And that really manifests itself when I wanted to go to university. No one had been in my family before. My mum and dad didn't have the money for me to go. And they weren't on board with me going to university initially because I'd been messing around for the first 17 years of my life, mainly with girls and alcohol and partying. And actually, so they weren't necessarily on board with this idea of me going to university. It was going to cost loads of money. They didn't know what the benefit of it was. And they had to sell some bonds and shares and pension stuff to enable me to go. So they really backed me from that perspective. But I had some really heated discussions with my mum. And actually, like my mum and dad, they're the reason I did it all. And that when I got my money, they're the first people that I gave money away to. But I only more recently have been talking to my mum about it. And I was like, why... Tell me, Mum, what was it like when I was wanting to go to university? She's like, Andrew, almost every day over that summer, I went into the bathroom and I cried because of how it was going on. And actually, the first time she told me that, I started crying because this was only a few weeks ago that we had this conversation. And she was like, I knew that you had the potential in you and I knew you could do it, but you're the oldest son. I was very worried about you leaving flying the nest and all that sort of stuff. And she's like, I wasn't trying to stop you. I was just very upset that you were going to be leaving and I knew that you were going off into the big bad world. But when you have this love and protection behind you, you can achieve anything. Because I knew if everything went wrong, I lost my house, I lost my wife, I lost all my money, I'd knock on my mum and dad's door. They said, hey, come in, do the dishwasher while you're here, Andrew, go and sweep upstairs and you can start all over again. And that is a support system and a community system that money can't buy. That is love.
Yeah.
And actually, that's where my confidence came from.
Yeah, I love that. And as you say, knowing that regardless... someone has your back is real reassurance, isn't it? It gives you the confidence to go all in.
It does.
Because actually what you really value, you can never lose.
Yes. And there's a lot of talk about working class mentality and stuff within the UK in particular. I believe in it. Yes, I was nicking bikes and stuff when I was a kid and getting into all sorts of trouble and I was nearly killed when I was 15 and I nearly killed the guy back and all those different things. But this beautiful basis of community And if you can go all in on something and know you have a safety net, like so for me, what's the worst case that can happen? I go back to my bedroom where I started off and I start again. And could I go and get a 100K job at a big FM business the next day? Absolutely. I backed myself to do that. So like my worst case scenario was I started again. And actually that would have been just another part of the story. And I believed and had enough of an ego, and I still do, that if I lost everything, I go and start again, and I do it twice as big. So, but I don't need to. So that's hence why we're here having this conversation.
So tell me, obviously, I was going to say you and your wife, but that's probably an exaggeration. You decided to set up your own business, and your wife supported that idea in principle.
Yes.
At that stage, you mentioned you didn't have children.
Yeah.
Of course, you did have a house and a mortgage, and you were married to your wife.
Yeah.
How real was the risk of failure then? Did you and your wife genuinely believe there was a risk that you might lose your family home and that you might both end up back at your respective parents' houses? Or did you just not even see that risk?
Yeah. We knew it was a risk because we discussed the risk, and we didn't have heated arguments about it. It was one of those where I said, look, Heather, you know me well enough. Heather's my wife. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go all in. Heather didn't want me to not, she wasn't against it because she thought it would fail. She was against it because she knew I would go all in, and because she'd been with me about 10 years at that stage. So that was the challenging conversations.
And sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. By that you mean she knew that this would become an obsession.
Yes.
And she knew it would become your single focus.
Yes, exactly.
Probably at the detriment of her family life, children, etc. Is that what she meant?
You've got it exactly right. Okay. Yeah. So she knew that I would become obsessive about it, and she knew that it would be the only thing I was interested in.
Where does this sort of obsessive sort of trait come from?
Yeah.
Which your wife clearly diagnosed early.
Yes. I actually don't know. I haven't been diagnosed with any particular things. I'm just very single-minded. So when I put my mind to something, that is the goal. And whether that is blood donations, whether that's losing weight, whether that is growing a business, whether that's visiting every country in Europe or whatever, I love goals and I love hitting them, but to my detriment, because all I am doing is hitting that goal. But you know what? If I set myself a goal, I will achieve it. That is my mentality. But other things will slip around the side of me, and that's okay because I'm aiming for this goal over here. But I am your classic. I will go 1000% focused on something, and then as soon as it's done, finished, forget it. So I lost 9 stone in 7 months once. I woke up one day and I just went on a 500-calorie diet. Right? No special jabs or medicines or anything like that. One day, 500-calorie diet for 150 days straight. I lost 9 stone. And it's all documented in the press. Lad Bible did a piece on me, but they made it look like I put 9 stone on in 7 months in the headline. But actually, my relationships were struggling then. I wasn't a nice person to be around because I was very grumpy because I was hungry. And actually, although I achieved the weight loss target, it wasn't necessarily good for my relationships overall.
Yes.
And you become very boring because you don't want to go on holiday because you're going to eat. You don't want to go out with your mates because you're going to get drunk. So all those things. So I don't know where it comes from. I just have this hyper focus.
Yes.
That if I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. And actually, I'm in this wonderful position now where I've proved everything I needed to prove to everyone or myself. So when you're not sort of holding yourself to the standards of other people, that's a really freeing position to be in. But I have very high expectations of myself as well. So for me, I'm only ever battling myself. And that's sort of a conversation that I have in my head on a daily basis. But yeah, I set targets, but I don't know where that comes from. That's just how I'm wired.
I mean, certainly now more than ever, there is a consistent talk about balance, sort of work-life balance, and making sure that you are consistent in all areas of your life. Now people have to do minimum 10,000 steps a day, otherwise perhaps there are health implications. What's your view on that? Because of course you've been quite intentionally inch wide, mile deep.
Yes.
You have a focus at the cost of everything else. You achieve it, and then you set a new goal.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what's required to be a successful entrepreneur, or do you think you can actually just be brilliant at everything?
So no, what I'm doing, no, I don't think that's what you need to do. I admire those that can balance. But like I said, I haven't met many that can. It's this sort of wonderful idea. I think I was even watching a Stephen Bartlett thing, who I'm not an enormous fan of, by the way, but watching Stephen Bartlett. And he was saying about, they were talking about focus and they were talking about balance and can you do all those things? I just think if you're going to be really good at something, then you need to work harder at it than other people do.
Right.
And fundamentally, there's this 10,000 hours rule, isn't there? They say if you do 10,000 hours something, you'll be within the top 5% of the population that can do that thing. I sort of buy into that a little bit. I don't think anyone is different or better than anybody else. But if I focus entirely on Sudoku for the next 10,000 hours, I'm going to be better at Sudoku than the next person there.
That's right.
So I think I don't necessarily think balance is what you need to be successful, because success is all in our own head. Because what you deem as successful is different to me.
Exactly.
My mum in Sainsbury's, she was stacking shelves for a long time, and then she went on the till. And then one day, the general manager of that store in Cowley came down to her and said, "Do you want to be my PA?" And they paid her a couple of pounds an hour more, and she sat upstairs and she made tea and she wrote emails. She felt the biggest level of self-actualization that I've ever met out of anybody. And in the end, she had imposter syndrome. She felt like a fraud because she was sat upstairs on £2 an hour more, and all she did was make tea and write emails. And the rest of her friends, they'd been there for 30 odd years, they were still just, supermarket workers downstairs, back on minimum wage. And actually, but that's fantastic, because for her, that's what success looks like. And there are many, many people who go on to make tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, and have depression shortly afterwards. Certainly men in particular. I've heard stats as many as 87% of men who sell their businesses have some form of depression after they finish. I primarily think that's because they go all in and they sacrifice a lot of stuff around them. Then yes, you get tens of millions in your bank account one day, but there isn't a fanfare for you because they've all pissed off because you haven't been there for them. So why would they be there for you now? And so I think I've lost my trail of thought ever so slightly, but I think those successes are just deep within you, not within others. And if you can find a balance where you feel success inside, not based on the success of other people, that's real balance. And I'm not sure balance is success. That's my point, because it depends if you're trying to achieve something. Because if you're really trying to achieve a goal, the balance isn't always what you need to get there. Sometimes it's imbalance that gets you there.
Well, I totally agree with the point about mastering. And of course, marginal gains is all about that, right?
Yes.
So the more you do something, the better you will get at it.
Yes.
But the more efficient you become at it, you become expert.
Yeah.
And of course, that's when good goes to great.
Yeah.
To quote a friend of mine, Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
So back to the decision that you made and you imposed on your wife, which was, we are now setting up a business.
Yes.
So of course, you knew what the financial risk was, but it was a risk that you had to take because of the opportunity.
Yes.
In the first year, how did you fund, I guess, the business and your life simultaneously? Because you'd waved goodbye to a guaguaranteed six-figure salary, right?
Yeah. I mean, this sounds like a lovely story, but it's all true. So literally in the second week, crikey, it was really successful. That's the headline. So in the second week, we won a contract with Bulgari Hotel, which was my very first contract. £200,000 a year contract, quarterly in advance payment terms, and a good amount of profit that meant I could start paying myself a salary. So 2-3 weeks into the whole business, we were able to have that. I also just so happened that on the second day that I'd started, an old client that I used to know, he just left his business, and the CFO was looking for someone to run their facilities for them on an immediate basis because they were in a bit of trouble. He recommended me. I went in there as like a £500 a day consultant, and I only worked in the mornings. So I just did 8 till 12 for them right from the very beginning. So almost like on day 2, I now had an office because I was working 20 hours a week in someone else's building. They were paying me £500 a day to do that. And in the afternoons then I was starting to build the business up. And then I won Bulgari, and then it started to build from there. So I think in the first month we turned over 10 grand. In the second month it was 70 grand. By the end of year 1, we were run rating at 1.5 million. End of year 2, run rating 3 million. End of year 3, 5 million. So it grew really, really quickly.
And this was all self-financed?
Entirely self-financed. I had nothing.
You talked about your early contract wins.
Yes.
Were these businesses you had long-standing relationships with, or are these new opportunities that you had unearthed from a standing start?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, they were a bit of a mixture of everything. To be honest, there were so many in the end that it all sort of came together. Look, the thing to understand about my story is for those 6 years when I was working for Rollright and then Billfinger, I was building a personal brand. So I was networking really heavily. I was in the magazines all the time. I was volunteering. I was winning awards. I was building a presence for myself. So then when I set up on my own and said, by the way, I think this sector is broken. Here's everything I'm going to do to fix it. And when I called people, they knew who I was. I had some presence already. This isn't a story of I just started a business from my bedroom with literally nothing and no 6 years previous experience. This is a story of I took 6 years to build something, and then this is what I did with it. So I think for me, Bulgari I knew, so I'd worked with them previously. And Jeff, he was someone I knew I could call on the first couple of days and say, hey, Jeff, can you help me out? And he said yes. Now, look, again, for people who are trying to find their first customer, why did I go for Jeff? I'll give you 3 reasons. Bulgari is an amazing brand. So in my own head, I was like, if I can win that one first, then I can tell people that story and I can sell the shit out of that story to other people. 2, I knew Jeff, so good and bad. So he knew the good and bad about me. But 3, Jeff had 2 kids who were same age as I was, and both of them ran their own businesses. So as a father who had 2 kids who were running their own things, did I think an element of it, a very small element, was, oh, well, my kids are in that situation. I'd love someone to help them like I'm going to help Andrew? Yes, absolutely. He also knew he could rely on me. And actually, when you're an early entrepreneur, in my world, it's a 24/7 job because we look after buildings and hotels run 24 hours a day. So if there's a problem, they know the swimming pool's not heating up right, the air conditioning's wrong in the suite, or I don't know, the security doors are not working, they call us and we fix it. Now, that is a 24-hour-a-day thing. So Jeff knew he could call me any time of day and I wouldn't miss the call. And actually for 9 years, I didn't miss a single call out of hours. And that's how all in I was on this. My phone was always on maximum. I was always available. I stopped various things to answer phone calls for people. Obviously, as the team got bigger, it was easier to spread that workload out, but that's where it was. So when I had the consultancy that was paying me some money on a daily basis and had an office in Waterloo that I wasn't paying for, and I used their address on my website, which they were happy for me to do, and I could use their meeting rooms to have meetings and I could bring people in for interviews. It was just perfect. It was just lucky that all happened at the right time. But I had 6 years of experience, and the guy, Mark, who left his job and given my details to the CFO, if I hadn't have had a good relationship with him for that time, he wouldn't have recommended me to the CFO. If I hadn't have had a relationship with Jeff, he wouldn't have answered my call, for example. But quite quickly, when people heard that we were working for a couple of organizations and I'd started up, we immediately had people calling us because I was in a sector that had loads of really big businesses that were delivering just shit services, frankly. They were just poor at delivering services to customers. So when you had these clients who had these big behemoth facilities businesses that were just poor, and then they saw that I was going to go and try and change the world and do something different through this smaller business, it just caught the imagination. Right place, right time, right message, great marketing, great personal brand. And that's how it started to come together. And I think our 3rd contract was Yahoo, which is another amazing name. And then Twitter came to us as well. And then London Zoo. And just very quickly, we had these incredible brand names. So we're only like a year old. And actually, we already had some better brands and businesses that were 30 years old. And that gave you a great heart and sort of a place to begin from.
Yeah, well, as you said, those marquee clients are the foundations to build a business on the back of,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
You mentioned that for the last sort of 3-4 years of your employed career,
yes,
you were consciously building a profile, investing in relationships, developing a network to leverage.
Yes.
Was it that conscious? Were you doing things knowing that these are the things you need to have in place to set up a successful business?
No.
Or was it a bit more sort of coincidental than that?
It was definitely coincidental. I originally started the networking to try, because when I went into Rollright, I was mainly in commercial. I ended up in operations, but commercially, one of my jobs was to find new business. So one of the ways that I found new business was just go to networking events and chat to people. But my view, and I think this is still good advice now, I've been to thousands of networking events now, literally. I'm almost tired of the networking scene. Many people go to networking events to sell. I think that's wrong. I think just go to networking events to be a memorable, good person.
Yes.
And like I was saying about chatting to the staff and about their kids and their holidays and all that, if you do the same in networking land, and then people are, oh yeah, how did you remember that? That's really interesting that you remembered. And then when they have a need for your goods or services, then they call you.
Yes.
And as soon as they call you, the power is back on your side because you know that you have an in. I was in a world where often clients would tender their work and there'd be 6 or 7 different organizations that would be tendering services. In the end, those clients were coming to us and saying, hey, we want you to be on the tender list. As soon as you know they want you to be on the tender list, you probably got a 30, 40, 50% chance that you're going to win that bid and actually going to put a lot of effort into it as well. And in the end, I think after about six years, our win rate was nearly 80%.
Wow.
We won 80% of the bids that we put in, but only because we were really selective on what we bid on. And we'd worked really hard behind the scenes, networking wise, to make sure we knew why they were going to choose us. It didn't always happen. And actually, 20% of the time we got it wrong. And even when we're a £20 million business, you got to the final 2 and procurement would say, really sorry, you're too small. And you're like, oh, that's really frustrating to hear, because actually you could have told us we were too small 4 or 5 weeks ago before we put all this effort in. Keep smiling. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity. We were blessed to even be talking to somebody like you. If it ever goes wrong, please give us a call back. And sometimes it did. And actually, like, exiting in a beautiful way when someone has said no to you is a really important skill. And I have seen many people fail at that, because as soon as you burn that bridge, you're never getting an opportunity there again.
Right.
And actually, like, when you lose, you need to have the biggest smile on your face. My team knew in the end, the nicer I was being to people, the more pissed off I was. Actually.
Well, you're smiling at me, so
No,
I can only therefore assume like you're not enjoying the podcast.
But if I ever was nice to them, they're like, "What's wrong with you?"
Love that.
Yeah.
And of course, so far it sounds like the first month, quarter, years of your business actually were just hyper successful.
Yeah.
Let me ask: was there ever an obstacle that you found tough to overcome? Was there ever a dark moment or a sort of, let's say, trough that you couldn't really see a way of getting over?
Just for context, so Pareto, when I was running it, we grew 33 out of 36 quarters in that time. The 3 quarters we didn't grow was COVID, where we were pretty much flat. But off the back of COVID, we grew 77%. So we had a huge growth spike off the back. The biggest challenge that I found was we were a great business to do business with, and we were on this wave and this journey. So people loved being part of our business, and we trusted people quite a lot, suppliers and clients and things. We got to a point where we became a bit too trustful. So we found this new client. He was starting up his own business. It was a charity on the South Bank who had taken on a building that was putting artists in there to promote artists that were on the South Bank. Fantastic. So we went with them. We helped them set up. We funded a lot of the fit out, and we did this, that, and the other. Anyway, about 9 months in, 12 months in, the whole thing went pop, and we lost 400K in one afternoon. We had 400K bad debt, and we were being lied to the whole time. And it was a really difficult situation. The client that we were working with was known to us through one of our directors. So this wasn't even some randomer off the street. This was someone that we knew. And right up until the day that the bailiffs turned up, they were still saying, yeah, money's coming, money's coming, money's coming. And you want to believe that it is.
Of course.
It's a really harsh lesson to learn, because for anyone who's in profit and loss, that 400K comes off your P&L that year. There's nowhere to hide it, can't exceptionalize it. So all of a sudden in those years, we had a spike in profitability the year before, and then it was down the year afterwards because we just lost this 400. Now we knew eventually it would come back up again, which it did, threefold, which was wonderful. But that really taught us a lesson in the middle of everything that I just described, that you got to be careful who you trust. You got to be careful you don't get carried away with everything that's going on, because it's very easy to just get caught up in all the excitement and the wave. And when you have a business that was growing as fast as ours was, it's very difficult to put processes in place sometimes, because it's just like, right, win the next one, win the next one, win the next one. And organic growth solves all your problems. So you just keep growing and growing and growing. And we were very good at organic growth. But actually then you don't always go back and put the pillars in place. And when you don't have the pillars in place, you make decisions like letting someone have 400K of your money that then never gives it back. So I think for me, that was like a really important lesson. And after that, we slowed things down a little bit. We put some processes in place. We started doing credit checks. Now, I've mentioned some wonderful brands to you, and there's many I won't mention for what I'm about to say. Some of these massive brands have terrible credit ratings. Terrible, that actually if you ever work with them for a business like as a startup, you wouldn't even touch them. And it's a really interesting dynamic where you have this huge brand that you want to work with them because it's good for your business. They are beating you up from a procurement perspective about every angle that they can and getting money off here, here, and here. And yet you're turning around and going, you've got a 2 out of 10 score on Experian here, everything all right. And then they ignore it and they don't want to engage in that conversation. So it made us have a few more difficult conversations, but ultimately we were growing up at the same time. If you think about Pareto, when I ran it as a 10-year life, we're only in our teenage years really as we were going through some of that. And I tell a wonderful story, but never forget, I'm just some kid from a working class family who started a business when I was 27 that happened to grow to a £50 million enterprise with 550 staff. That was never the plan. It grew significantly more than I thought it would. And there were many times where I just sat there and went, bloody hell, how have we got ourselves in this situation? Because I can't pretend I know what I'm doing. And good advice for people who are growing businesses: the team that gets you from nothing to 1 million, the team that gets you from 1 to 10 million, the team that gets you from 10 to 50 and 50 to 100, they may be different people. If you can find people that are brilliant and go through that whole journey with you, that is marvelous. But as you get bigger, you need people with experience. You can't just take a punt on someone that you enjoy working with, because they need experience and they need growth. So as we got bigger, the people we added to the business were more technical, they're a bit older, they had more experience, they had experience of running enterprises that were 20, 30, 40, 50 million, rather than just a group of us that were sort of making it up as we went along. But I love that, because that's the camaraderie piece, and you were like going into battle every time together, and you hope that all of you would make it out alive.
Totally. Well, it's the hustle of business, right? It's what makes being an entrepreneur exciting,
yes.
arguably.
Yeah, exciting and also terrifying and tiring at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned there that a management team that can set up a business and get that business to cash break even is not a management team who can IPO the same business. So which key members of management did you have to switch as the business scaled?
You're going to think I'm not being honest here, but I am. And you can go and ask them yourselves. I had 15 senior people in the end. We never lost a single one. In 10 years, we retained our entire senior management team, never turned over one. Now, how did we do that? They didn't all join us on day one, obviously. We started off with some people that I would call the people that I liked. So I was like, I like you. You don't really have the experience for what you're doing, but I know if I WhatsApp you on a Sunday afternoon, you're going to take my WhatsApp and we're going to deal with this shit together, right? That was how we started. So I had this brilliant team. So people like Dan Scotchmer, who's been with Pareto for 10 years now, brilliant, hardworking, all-in sort of team members. So that's fine, and you do that for a little while, but actually then you realize, these finances are getting a bit big now. We're a £10 million business. We've got all this stuff we need to do with the HMRC. We better actually get looking at this. So then we started to bring in more qualified people. So like a decent CFO, for example, and CFOs, people won't understand this unless they've run a business. The CFO for me is one of the most important people in the entire business. You can make or break a business by the financial processes, the financial reporting, the cash flow management. It is just so critical.
Yeah, well, you just talked about credit control, bad debt.
Literally.
That's the CFO, right, to avoid.
It was the CFO that came to me with that bad debt that I just described. It was the CFO that came and said, I'm really worried about this. And actually, how have you let it get to this situation sort of conversation? Fair enough. It was the right conversation. We were very lucky because we were growing so quickly. It was more about adding more skill set as we went through. But as we added more people, we started to hire people into that team. The people who we hired in, say, year 7, we wouldn't have hired in year 1 because we were starting to change the dynamic. But all those people we did hire in years 1, 2, 3, 4, they came on the journey as well. So we didn't ever have to switch anybody out. We never lost anybody, which is remarkable for a business that grew in the way that we did.
I agree.
But we did have to bring in people that, and be really, really deliberate about how I say this. Not that we didn't like them, but usually we hired people that we thought would be great Pareto people. They'd be within the team. We actually ended up hiring people for their skill set in the end, which wasn't how I initially hired people in. But you needed the skill set, because Andrew coming up with all these random ideas and WhatsApping all the time going, do this, do this, do this, do this. That's not sustainable when you're a £25 million business trying to grow to a £50 million business. And on the back of COVID, we grew from 18 million turnover to 32 million turnover in 1 year. And then we did 42 million and then 50 million. We had enormous growth in those 2 years just before we exited. And actually, we needed people who knew what they were doing. You couldn't just make it up as you were going along at that stage. And of course, as soon as private equity is involved and corporate finance and things, you start having to answer all sorts of questions and much more financial due diligence and everything too. So we very fortunately never lost a senior person, but we just added more technical people as we got bigger. And the type of recruit we made changed as life went on. And that's how we did it.
Well, that makes sense. And that's incredible. And it goes a lot to the culture you built in the business and the level of commitment that you were giving your people and they were giving you back in return. How did you create alignment? Certainly with these C-suite individuals like your CFO, because let's face it, they were helping you build a big business that you owned. So how did you get them aligned?
Very simply, sweet equity was the easiest way to do it. So we created a 20% sweet equity pot, which went on to be worth about 15 million quid in the end. So it's worth a decent amount, but they didn't know that. And actually, we only created the sweet equity pot in about year 6, year 7. So it was quite late on in the process that we did it. Again, it won't surprise you, but camaraderie and bringing people together and being together physically is a continuous theme with me. But we would have our board meetings in rooms like this. We'd go to a pub and we'd sit upstairs and we'd have dinner and we'd all be together. And we weren't going for like Mayfair steak. We were just going for a Nando's.
Yes.
We used to run our board meetings in Nando's a lot of the time. And at the end of each month, we had to raise all of our reactive invoicing. We'd go and sit in Pret downstairs and do it. Because I just sort of like this idea that we were just together and doing this in a non-formal way. As you get bigger, it's hard to keep that because financial process really is important and you can't keep having your board meetings in Nando's. But actually, so that's how we did it. We were just together. And the other key is WhatsApp. Like WhatsApp created a level of connectivity with people that had just never been experienced before. I actually think WhatsApp is to blame for a lot of burnout these days and a lot of the lack of ability for people to disconnect from their work. I didn't have a personal phone for 10 years. I only had my work phone. So literally like any communication I had was always through this phone. So if I ever went on holiday, it was a huge inconvenience for me because now I had to work from a hotel instead of working, which meant I wasn't present for my family and I wasn't enjoying what was going on with the kids and I was never able to disconnect. In my early career at Rollright, it was when Blackberries had just come in.
Right.
So Blackberries had the BlackBerry Messenger and you started messaging each other and then WhatsApp came shortly after that. So that connectivity, it was a way that we would do it. And now look, you put 15 senior people in a WhatsApp group and there is a level of trust between them that look, what we say in this group is for the good of the business and we're going to do this together. That was another way of sort of having the key messages that were the same for everybody. So when you had a culture, and yes, we employed more technically important people as we got bigger, but we had a phrase, which was, we don't hire dickheads. And that don't hire dickheads was really important to us because many of us, me, most of the time, could be a dickhead. So we would just say to each other, look, it says on the wall, we don't hire dickheads. What's going on? And we'd really have that challenge with each other. So I think if you can have that camaraderie and challenge and you are doing it for the good of the community, and by the way, we're going to Pret tomorrow morning for breakfast or Nando's after work, whatever. That's how we brought it together. But then you gave a 20% sweet equity pot to the business that they knew would be worth literally, say, 15 million quid one day. That's a great way to sort of make sure everybody's on the same journey.
Totally. And obviously you've mentioned that as the business grew, you started to hire different people for skills rather than because they were good guys or perhaps there was cultural alignment with.
Yeah.
Was there a point before you launched the sale process? Was there a point where you started to fall out of love with what the business had become because the business had to become something different for it to be saleable?
I don't think so. I still love Pareto today, even was it 13 years ago that I started now. I never fell out of love. What became different for me was children. So before I had kids, I was selfish. And even when I had kids, I was still selfish, but I was selfish. I focused on, I could, to some degree, and this isn't a nice thing to say, but we're being honest here, I could come to terms with the fact that my wife was going to be annoyed that I wasn't going home that day because I had an opportunity to go and see a customer at an event and I wanted to make an impression on them. I could come to terms with that. And I knew the risks that were associated with that. When you have a 6-month-old baby girl that is crying for you and all she wants to be is cuddled and there is a biological urge inside of you that you cannot beat, that changes your life. And for a while, I was coming home at like 6:45 when my daughter was just born. I was coming home at 6:45 most nights. I would give her a bath and maybe 15 minutes or so, give her a cuddle, give her back to my wife, and I'd keep working. And to some degree, I felt like that was enough. It wasn't, but I felt like it was enough to start off with. And then COVID happened. And then in COVID, we had our second baby. And then all of a sudden, I was there all the time. And like the connection that I built with the kids then through COVID was really important. It just all happened at the same time. So when COVID came to an end and we were starting to go out a bit more, I had this biological drag that was like, no, actually, the kids are really important to me. And I love spending time with them. And I was there for the birth of my son in terms of I was at home all the time when it happened. So the connection was just incredible. So then that gave, I mentioned this 3 years to get the business sold and cross off each day to get to the 1,000 days. It just made me so hyper-focused. If I wasn't already laser-focused, I was now really laser-focused because in the most respectful way to my wife, although I was accepting that she might be frustrated that I wasn't back from an event, when you have a baby girl who is crying for you to love her, it's a completely different thing. And I don't care whether people have kids or not. It's your choice if you have your kids and how you bring them up, that's your choice as well. But for me personally, the biological drag was significantly more deep than my entrepreneurial want and my needs for that. So it pulled me back in. And luckily for me, I managed to balance for the first time, getting all of those things happening so I could go back and be a better dad.
And you mentioned there, and of course we discussed this pre the podcast today, Andrew, but you mentioned there that that's when you committed to a 3-year plan, which was to fundamentally get the business sold by the end of that 3-year period. And you had a physical calendar on the wall with 1,000 days and you were crossing off each. Can I ask you, at the end of that 3-year plan, was it the 3-year guillotine that motivated you, or was it the number at the end?
It was never about a number.
Right.
It was more, I mentioned about holding myself to a higher account than other people would hold me to. It would have been the disappointment in myself that I hadn't done it. And I couldn't allow myself to not do it, if that makes sense. So that was only an internal battle I was happening. I really fear for young people who go online and look at other people and what other people have and how brilliant their social medias are and how many likes they get and things, and start to compare themselves to those people. Because the one thing you need to understand is those people they spend tens of thousands a month on their social media. You in your room with a phone trying to post some videos, you're never going to compete with 10, 20, 30 grand a month. And I never did. That's never been a problem for me. If somebody's got a million people on socials, fantastic for them. That's up for them to get on with. So I just was never driven in that way, and I never took that. So, and also money wasn't necessarily the driver. I didn't necessarily want to have like a certain number in my bank account. My goal was just to buy my time back. Literally, the goal was to not have to go to work on a daily basis, to wake up and make decisions about what I did on a daily basis. I didn't know how much money I needed to do that. And I was lucky that I made more money than I needed to in the end. But actually, that was never really the driver. It wasn't so I could show my mum I had a bank account with this many millions in it. It was so that I could go and have a cup of tea with her and have a chat and not be pressured. Or I used to go around on a Saturday afternoon in the height of everything, and I'd just fall asleep on the floor. Because I got home, I was in my safe place, I was with my mum and dad, I just lay on the floor and fall asleep. And it was almost like my nervous system had to reset itself. And Saturday afternoon was when I did it, watching Final Score. And so it was never really about the money, but I understand money is what enabled me to get off the curve, and the corporate curve that I mentioned at the start.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, if we just spend a minute on this, because as a corporate finance advisor who helps owners consistently buy, sell businesses, and of course, most of what I do is actually helping people like you anticipate when is the right time to extract value from the business they've built. For me, there's only 2 lines on the graph worth looking at, time and value. And of course, sometimes people will focus on value than time, and vice versa. So it's interesting to hear that you committed to a 3-year exit, almost without any real clarity around what that would mean in pound, shilling and pence, other than a meaningful capital return to you. So it was really all about time. Nothing really to do with the economics, as long as it was meaningful.
And look, yes and no. If someone would have come in with a really low ball offer, we never would have accepted it, and that would have been it. But I guess that famous Kanye West quote, I guess we'll never know, right? It went very well and it was okay. I don't know, and this is a challenge to myself, if after 3 years I still hadn't sold, the business still hadn't grown, or we'd had an offer that was well below what we thought was market value, that would have been a difficult set of conversations. But luckily for me, I never got to those conversations because I was so focused on getting to the outcome that I wanted to. But and honestly, I don't know. It would have been difficult. I couldn't sit here and tell you how that would have gone, because I know in my own head I would have kept going until I got to the outcome that I wanted to get to.
Right.
But in corporate finance, you're absolutely right. We've bought a couple of businesses now and sold a couple of times. You have to find the right entrepreneur at the right time, with the right business, with the right EBITDA, with the right market environment to make everything balance out. And I think corporate advisors, I've met many in my time and had many Mayfair stakes and all that sort of stuff, and private equities. It's about trying to just make sure everyone understands the realities of the situation. You must meet many entrepreneurs who come in and go, oh, my EBITDA is 10 million. I'm going to get 20 times for that. And I'm walking out here with 200 million quid. We know it likely isn't going to work out that way. And I think they've read something on bloody ChatGPT these days that tells them something, or they've seen a fake story on YouTube about how somebody did this, and this. I mean, the realities are far away from that. So I think for me, it is a whole different set of questions, and just something, if I may go into, about the psychology of the whole thing. So
absolutely.
I talk
that
about
actually, sorry to interrupt you, that is often an area that's so overlooked, but it's often more important than anything. You know, a lot of CF advisors or corporate lawyers will talk about the transaction, valuation, deal structure, protections in the share purchase agreement. But no one's talking about actually not only how it's impacting you psychologically as the founder, but no one's talking about some of the softer elements of the transaction, which can often actually inform most of the decision making.
And also, look, I mean, having met many entrepreneurs now who've sold businesses or are trying to sell businesses, entrepreneurs are a special breed, right? They need to be studied because their brains work in slightly different ways, and you can't always account for people. People wake up one day and make very strange decisions. And I met a couple of guys who were running, I think it was an air conditioning business, and they got right to the end. They got a final offer, and the due diligence had been completed with the private equity they were going to sell to, and they pulled out on deal day. Imagine how happy the private equity was about having spent £1 million on DD and then never to get anything else. Just going back to the psychological point. So one thing I proactively did was I worked with a business psychologist in the lead up to the exit. So a guy called Stuart Duff at Pern Candola. And the reason I did that was because I was conscious that I was going to get to a point where I was going to have a load of money. I'd sold the business. I was going to take a massive step back, and I was going to reintegrate myself into my personal life again. But what did that mean? How was I going to do it? You know, and I was sort of trying to comprehend all these different feelings and thoughts and what was important and stuff. So I worked with Stuart for about 6 weeks, and we just talked about swimming towards this island and this concept that when you're trying to sell a business or get a load of millions or become a millionaire for the first time, you're swimming towards an island. And one day you're going to get to that island. And when you get there, what are you going to do? What's it all about? And we talk about men and depression and selling their businesses, because many men, they get to the island, they're holding their pina colada, they're looking around and there's no one there. And they might be on a beach in Barbados, fantastic, but who cares, right? They're there on their own and drinking, smoking, eating, fantastic. So what I worked on with Stuart was we talked about gold medal syndrome. He was saying that a lot of gold medalists, they work for 4 years, they go to the Olympics, they get their gold medal. Immediately afterwards, depression hits because everything they've just worked for, they've achieved, and now they have nothing. The door's not ringing, the bell's not ringing, the phone's not ringing, whatever. So I think for me, I was really conscious about this and the softer side of selling, because you're right, corporate advisors, they're focused on EBITDA multiples, what's the working capital, what's this, what's that. And actually, sometimes it's what's going on in the person's head that is going to sell this business. And are they going to sign the deal on the day? So yeah, I think the psychology of it is deeply missed. And some of the work I do now is I help founders and tell them this sort of story and that they're going through. And I'm saying, what's important to you? So when you open your bank account and there's 10 million quid in there, what's the first thing you're going to buy? Or what's the first thing you're going to do? For me, it was I bought all my family their houses, and I did things like I bought a hotel at Christmas. I bought all the rooms in a hotel at Christmas, so all 75 members of my family could be together on Christmas Day, because no one had a living room big enough, right, to be able to do it. Or I go to France for 4 weeks every year, and I get a big house, and I invite all my family over and just say, hey, look, everything's free. Just come and join us if you want to. So I knew those things I was going to work on. I bought my farm, I bought my quad bike, I bought my forest, I bought my nature reserve. All these things were planned, and so that I actually had something to aim for. And again, because I'm hyper-focused, if I know that my to-do list is plant a forest today or buy a nature reserve today, then I'm going to do it. And I'll do it to a certain extent. So yeah, that was important from a psychology perspective.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's all about purpose, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, as you say, once you get onto that island, brilliant. It's almost like New Year's Eve, right? You know, we're all anticipating midnight, Big Ben strikes. But now what? Because actually the world keeps turning. You have to survive, and it's 24 hours in a day. You can't just sit on that beach alone doing nothing.
And how much is a letdown is New Year's Eve every year?
It's all right. It's always an anticlimax, right? And it's because people think that things will change, but no, things won't. The life that we all have continues until we die, and the world keeps turning on the same axis, right?
But also, and this, I'm using my own story here as well, for maybe however long you've been running that business, let's just say 10 years, for 10 years, if you haven't had balance, which many people don't have balance, you've got a lot of making up to do after that. Because otherwise, I mean, I don't know the stats, but I know a disproportionately high number of marriages with entrepreneurs in them will end in divorce, because one of them is focused on that and the other one is focused on trying to make it all work. So for me, is one of the main commitments I made when I finished was that I'd be a better husband and I'd be a better father. And that's what I've been working on. But that was a very deliberate decision. And I think there are many people who make significant sums of money that by that point, it's a bit too late. They've lost some of their relationships. They've been divorced. Their mates don't see them as much anymore because they've been so busy working. And it's how you do good in the world at that point. I think that's really important. And going back to community and charity and supporting others, which I've always done, that's been an important part of my life for the last couple of years.
Yes. And if you don't mind me asking, how much did you sell Pareto for?
Yeah, so in total, we did £81 million of exits through private equity with Pareto.
Incredible. And you were the single
shareholder? I was the single personal largest shareholder. We had various schemes in terms of sweet equity, and we had investment and things. But yeah, I was the single personal largest shareholder.
And when you look back and reflect, do you feel that you arguably exited too early? Did you leave value on the table?
No. We exited at a great time. We had a really brilliant level of growth. So we'd had, as I mentioned, we grew from 32, 42, 50. It was a great time. We had great trajectory for moving the business forward. It was the right time. And so, yeah, there's not an ounce of regret around the deal that we made. Brilliant deal. It was well looked upon within the sector. Great corporate finance advice that we had as well. So, from our perspective, it was all positive.
And when you look back at the business that you built in Pareto, on reflection and in hindsight, what is the one thing you would do differently? Acknowledging you did so many things brilliantly, but what is the one thing you would now do differently if you set up that business again?
If I was starting again, I would hire those more experienced people earlier. Oh. It took me 6 years to learn that story and that piece of advice. And yes, it would damage your profitability. I mean, look, we were profitable from year one and we remained profitable for the entire journey. I would hire those people earlier, and I would let go of more control earlier. But you just have to accept that cash flow will be more restricted because of that, and your EBITDA will be down to start off with, but the growth will come. I think what I'm saying to you is I would try and be more balanced from the beginning, but hiring good people, like a great CFO from the very beginning, that's the advice I give now. I would do that to make sure it works. And fractional CFOs and fractional chief marketing officers and COOs and stuff, it's a great way to get things started. Hire better people earlier. Sounds really simple advice, but actually when you don't have money and things, it's hard to do that.
It is, and as you say, saying it is simple.
Yes.
Doing it is really tough because as you say, you've got, I think, 3 parts to that conundrum. You've got do I have enough physical cash to go and hire that CFO who wants £150,000 per annum? Yeah. And if I don't have cash in the business to do that, do I have to go and dilute my equity position to fund the appointment of that C-suite professional? I think the second part is actually, is there a job that will entertain that CFO in this 1 million turnover property services business that arguably could justify it best a bookkeeper? So that's quite a tough thing, albeit nowadays fractional. CFOs could be a really good way of bringing the right person in on a fractional basis that could become full-time in time. And then for me, actually, the third part is people are focused on the wrong value metric. And by that, I mean, early on, as you say, perhaps, Andrew, your focus was bootstrapping and EBITDA. But the reality is that doesn't matter early. It only matters when you are under the microscope in terms of valuation. So being a loss-making business for 5 years is fine, as long as you are delivering top line and I guess GP growth in pursuit of becoming profitable.
That is great advice. It's very difficult to take that advice when you start a business.
Of course it is.
Because you're sat, and what you've just said is absolutely correct. So like when I mentioned the bad debt that we caught, luckily enough for us, it was more than 3 years away from when the sale happened. So actually when the due diligence was being done, which was extensive DD, when they went back, it was there and obviously it was declared, but it wasn't impacting.
Not relevant in terms of reference period.
No, and it happened once. It was one of those that you could declare that it had happened once and that was it. So I think for me, it's hard to accept that you're going to run a business for 3 or 4 years to start off with, and it's going to make a loss, and you have enough cash to make that loss as well. The other thing as well is, can you get a great CFO to come and work for $1 million turnover business and let them take the risk to come and be part of that? Because you're probably going to be giving equity away to enable them to make that risk.
Well, there you are.
Yeah, and actually you then need to understand what stage are they at. So we had a great CFO called Andy Holmes who worked with us. Now, Andy, he goes into businesses for 2-3 years. years, he grows them, he gets them to an exit point, and he knows probably after the exit, the new owners are going to either kick him out and bring in their own CFO, or you'll be merged into a group and the CFO is not needed anyway. But that's how he talked about it. He knew that, and there's no emotion in that.
Sure.
His job was to come in and make sure it was super successful for the bits that he was working on, knowing on the other side of getting his check that probably someone would kick him out.
Totally.
And that's the life of CFOs sometimes. And if you're in the private equity world, that's just it.
Of course.
And that's the brutal reality of selling businesses.
Agree. And can I ask, obviously you mentioned that when you were building the business, you were all in on the business, and you'd almost like agreed with your wife that in the interim, you wouldn't prioritize her, family life, friendships, etc. Always knowing / hoping that when all is said and done and you built and sold the business, all of the relationships on ice were still there.
Most of them,
Let me ask you, was that assumption correct in all areas? Because some people won't wait.
Yes. So yes, I guess if I go in order of importance. So with my wife, yes, she waited, but we had 2 kids as well. So it was hard for her to
Right, a bit of an obligation there.
Yeah, it was. My mum and dad, of course, and like my sisters, of course. So that was all I took for granted, to a way that I took the piss, frankly, for a long time, that I would just neglect all of that, but I'd come back and save it. And that's why I genuinely gave millions to my family. It's very, absolutely true. It was partly my way of saying sorry that I've been away for 10 years or so, but I'm now going to make your lives better. You don't have a mortgage anymore, sort of scenario. The harder one was my friends. Because actually the friends, that wasn't just I've been neglecting them for a few years. That was a long time, because I didn't even have time to see my kids. I didn't have time to go out in London on a Saturday night in my early 30s with my mates. There was just no time to do it. So I lost touch with some of those friends, there's no doubt. But actually those sort of 5 or 6 sort of core mates that I've got back together, now I've made amends. So now I'm like, right, look, I'm not going to pay you I'm not going to pay for anything, because they don't want my money. By the way, I think the best type of friends, they couldn't give a shit that I sold the business. They actually don't care. If I try and buy an extra round or pay for something, they're like, what do you think you're doing? You're nothing special. You're just Hulbert. We remember when you were stealing pizzas out the freezer and cycling. So I could not give a shit. And actually, they'd be offended if I really tried to push the money on them. That is brilliant. That's the sort of friends that you need, because it keeps you completely grounded in it. But what they will let me do is organize stuff. So now I organize holidays for us to go on. And so now we can go and just be mates again. And it's a famous clip online at the moment. But a few of us went to Napoli and then took the train up to Rome. We got to Napoli, had an amazing night in Napoli, and on the train the next day, we just had some beers, and literally just like the hiss of that first can of beer as you open it on the train, and all the kids are at home, and the wives are looking after all the kids, and you're just being mates again, and it's like being 16 again. It is so precious.
Electric, yeah.
It is, and you just feel so free, and it's amazing to be in that moment, and you don't care about judgment, and you've all seen each other at your worst and your best, right? Literally in those relationships that we have. And that is just amazing. So to be able to go back and do that and just enjoy each other again. And my mates that we're approaching 40 years old now, we're all at different stages. Some have kids, some are still single, living in flats on their own. And actually you lose touch because life gets busy. So when you have someone that can organize these things together, it's amazing. And actually, it's funny, we still take the piss out of each other like when we were 15 years old. And there's something, like I say, my money isn't valuable there. It doesn't matter. My skills of organizing are, because that's an amazing thing for us to do. But yeah, I'm trying to hit every country in Europe at the moment. So I've done 40 odd now. So my next trip is going to be to try and hit a couple of countries. I'm thinking Andorra and Monaco maybe is where we'll try and take them next. But yeah, we do it in a thrifty way. So, but yeah, look, ultimately you lose relationships with people, and you just have to remember what's important to you, and family, kids, and that will always come first. But now there's a bit more time for friends as well.
Yeah, no, I'm genuinely delighted, Andrew, that your wife, your children, your family, your friends, you've been able to rekindle the relationships that you want with them, because not everyone is fortunate. Sometimes people make those decisions for you. So I'm delighted to see that your all-in attitude to business hasn't cost you personally, because sometimes I'm sure we've both got friends whereby it has done.
Yes. And look, and don't get me wrong, they were difficult in those 10 years. There were difficult arguments. There were difficult conversations. There was just, it didn't mean it was always good. I wasn't always a nice person to be around. So I was so stressed. And even if I was in a room, I'd be on my phone. Because I say about WhatsApp, I'd always be doing something else. So they really tolerated me for some time. And I now feel I'm trying to use my skills for good, to show my love back to them.
Yes.
Thank you.
My last question for today. Conscious,
Yes.
this time has come and gone, Andrew. You mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast that maybe the thing that has inspired you the most in your life is your parents.
Yeah.
Because they've created such a safe place for you. They will always accept you. They've always got you. No matter what you do, you will always be their son.
Yeah.
When you sat down with your parents and told them that, this obsession with business has resulted in you selling a business for tens and tens of millions of pounds, genuinely, what do you think they thought and how did it make you feel?
It's my mum has like been my best friend all the way through this. Like my mum has been someone I could confide in, and my mum never let me get never let it run away with me.
Yes.
So I remember going in, and I think it was the Facebook contract. It was £1 million contract, and I was like, "Oh, mum, I think I'm going to win this Facebook contract." She's like, "No, Andrew, come on. Yes, you need to keep trying harder, but actually, it may not happen." And then I remember we had 2 private equity exits in total through this deal. And we thought the first private equity exit, we thought the business was worth maybe £6 million. And I said to my mum, look, we're going to go to the market and I think we're going to get 6 million and I'll get a chunk of that. And then the offers came in and they genuinely were between 14 and 20 million. And we had 8 offers. The corporate finance had done a great job for us at that time. And so the offers were between 14 and 20. And I mean, my jaw hit the floor. I was so underprepared for what the values of that were going to be. And I remember calling my mum late one night and saying, "Mum, look, the offers are..." She's like, no, that can't be right. I was like, "Mum, there's 8 of them here. And actually, we think we're going to take the one around 18 million. And she was always just keep me grounded. And she'd be like, "Oh, it may not happen. Just stay calm and do it." So I think I grew up in a family where we had a house, but money was hard, right? We couldn't do things. And one of the biggest drivers in my life, when I was in sixth form, because I was with my middle class mates at that stage, they all went on a trip to Canada. It's £800 to go. We couldn't afford for me to go because it was just a silly amount of money. So I think they were with me all the way through. And even when I was saying to my mum, no, tens of millions are coming, she didn't believe it. Not in a nasty way. It was completely incomprehensible to her that someone would pay this amount of money for what we would do. But it culminated on our 5th birthday party. Twitter hosted us. Twitter hosted our party for us. They paid for everything. They were such an amazing customer to work with before Musk came in. And my mum and dad were like the guards of honor there. They were the ones, and we got this big cake made of my face, my wife did, and they were there cutting the face up and stuff. And it was such an important part of the journey. But without having the counsel of my mum and my dad, it wouldn't have been possible for me, I think, to not break in that time. Because as entrepreneurs, and anyone who's listening to me here, you need to find a few people you can trust, who you can talk completely open.
Yeah, these are your anchors, right?
Oh, properly, because you can be in this world of business as much as you like. You are playing an act a lot of the time, and you are not being totally honest with them. So when you can go back to your mum or dad or your wife or your mate and be totally honest and be completely vulnerable, that's truly, truly powerful. So yeah, my mum and dad have a huge amount to thank for, and they're the ones that started me at university, and I was always wanting to pay them back. So
you are that investment. Into your degree has paid tenfold.
Well, and what a conversation about whether university is valuable or not at the moment. But we'll save that for another day.
Andrew, can I just say genuinely, it's been a phenomenally inspiring, really interesting, very dynamic podcast, and I've thoroughly enjoyed spending time with you. So huge thanks for being on my podcast today.
Thank you for your line of questioning. I think we got some confessions out there as well, and this is one of the most honest conversations I've had on camera. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. It has been an absolute pleasure today to have Andrew Hulbert on my Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast. From humble beginnings, it was fascinating to hear a little bit more about Andrew's career choices. Of course, post-university, getting a job, climbing the corporate ladder, but spending a lot of time building his own personal profile, creating relationships that he knew perhaps down the track he would be able to leverage or use to his benefit when setting up his first business, Pareto. It was really interesting just to spend a bit more time understanding how he and his wife viewed risk when they both decided, or I should say Andrew decided, to walk away from a 6-figure salary job to set up his first business, Pareto. Really needing to know not only how confident he was in his ability to set up and scale a business, but also understanding some of the personal things that perhaps husbands and wives and partners have to consider before making a decision to go it alone and set up your first business. Andrew talked on the podcast today a little bit about his fortune or luck as he went starting up, scaling his business. He talked about how fortunate he was in being able to win some early clients, which of course provided the cash runway to allow him to continue to scale the business. He also talked about the fact it was quite lucky, wasn't it, that he managed not only to bootstrap the business and fund the business through the profits that the business was generating, but also how he was able to attract great people who stuck with the business from not only inception, but to this very day. I'm not sure that's luck. I suspect his absolute energetic personality, his focus on people, his keenness to get people into the tent, and his absolute focus on making sure everyone benefits from collective endeavor are the reasons why Andrew has been very lucky. As he went about scaling his business Pareto, which he has since sold twice in 2 private equity transactions for tens of millions of pounds, of course he talked about the fact that actually for him, being an entrepreneur is not an open-ended mandate. He set up a business to scale a business with financial independence in mind, so he could spend more time with his wife, children, family, and friends. And what an awesome, honest purpose is that. Of course, having achieved his second exit, he now is doing exactly what he set out to do. And of course, all of this he has achieved before his 40th birthday. I think the things that I'm going to take away from today's podcast are threefold. First of all, inch wide, mile deep focus. Andrew's absolute obsession with building a great business he is unapologetic about. He warned his wife, family and friends that he would definitely be all in on business and perhaps therefore less so focused on them. But of course, his all-in focus on business is for them, to give them the choices in life that typically come with a price tag and to give them the ability to live life without needing to be financially focused in any way. The second thing definitely I will take from today's podcast is the importance of having objectives, clear focus, targets that are easy to quantify and that you can hold yourself account against. Being successful means many things. And of course, it's for you to decide how you define success, but make sure you can define success. Otherwise, will you ever be successful? Third and final thing, actually, is perhaps the importance of being humble. Andrew is a very, very successful entrepreneur. He has built and sold businesses. And of course, he has taken millions and millions of pounds out of each of the transactions he's been involved in. But he's still a normal guy, bringing up 2 children with his wife, and of course, likes to spend time with those people, not only that he enjoys the company of, but those people who have supported him throughout his journey, his parents, wife, and friends included. It has been a really inspiring podcast today. It demonstrates good guys can achieve great things. And it also demonstrates that actually, perhaps to achieve great things, one does have to sacrifice. You have been watching Confessions of an Entrepreneur, powered by RG. If you would like to listen to or watch this podcast or any other podcast from our Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast series, then for sure, please do so from wherever you download your podcasts. But for now, I am delighted that you, our viewers, have been able to join us today for this Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcast. And I really look forward to welcoming you, our viewers, onto future Confessions of an Entrepreneur podcasts.